Greetings and welcome to Be My Guest. Today I have Fiona Almeida as my guest. Welcome, Fiona.
Thank you, Hamsha.
Fiona Almeida is founder and executive director of Small Acts for Sustainability. She's a native of South Africa and now lives in Massachusetts. She obtained her master's in public policy from Tufts University from the Urban Environment Policy and Planning Department. Fiona received her BA from Wellesley College and her AS from Middlesex Community College. Almeida is passionate about global healthcare, education, gender equality, and the intersection of culture and identity. Fiona's research focuses on a minority group of African Indians called Siddhis living in Karnataka, India. She conducts ethnographic research and focuses on culture, identity, mental health, education, and women's reproductive health, specifically menstruation. Fiona has implemented 2 ongoing projects in several Siddhi villages in Karnataka. She teaches women the skill of making reusable cotton sanitary napkins and raises awareness on menstrual hygiene. In 2016, she implemented an awareness and prevention project called Break Free from Repression for Adolescents. The projects in India are part of her ongoing interest and commitment to women's education and reproductive health. But the first thing I should ask probably is the history. What got you started?
Sure. In 2013, when I went to college for my bachelor's degree, I was really interested in understanding the migration of Indians to Africa and Africans to India. So I'm really interested in the Indian Ocean diaspora.
All right.
And so that has been something that has brought me to where my projects have started. And the most important piece was me trying to kind of seek my identity and find understanding with being South African Indian, and trying to understand the piece of me that the Siddhis in Karnataka, India, who were Africans that were taken during the Indian Ocean slave trade. And I was just trying to understand the identity of how they feel and adapt and adopt to the Indian culture, and just trying to then figure out how is it that we have adopted and adapted to South African culture. And when I arrived in 2013, I went as a global exchange student to do some work with one of my mentors, Pash, and a friend of mine, Grace. I stayed in a Siddhi village. It was my first time going to India. My family has never been to India before, so it was a very exciting time, very emotional, great learning experience, and something that really humbled me. It was really beautiful to be in a tiny village called Mainali, where it's predominantly Siddhi community, and that is where I learned many things that have helped me to grow and also understand a lot about myself, and also helped me to figure out what was going on in the Siddhi community that was either different or similar to South African Indians. And so one of the things that I realized when you talk about the history is that's how I got to India.
So that's what got you to India.
That's what really got me there, yeah.
So isn't that interesting that we from India got to go to South Africa some 150, 60 years now, right,
Yes.
ago? And it's still mind-boggling. Why did people from Africa go to?
So they were taken during the slave trade, and
Right, you did say
Siddhis,
so.
and Siddhis have been in India for more than 800 years, and so the migration of that was
Even
a
before.
lot longer than Indians were brought to South Africa,
How
and they were
interesting.
taken as slaves, navigators. The women were taken as concubines. So there's a variety of ways that the Africans were taken to India.
And how did they adapt all those years back?
I think they're fairly resilient, just very similar to South African Indians who have adapted to the South African culture, our taste, our dressing, our education system. Siddhis are very resilient and are able to speak multiple Indian languages. They dress very traditional. They have multiple religions, so they either follow Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, and very much do all of their prayers or pujas as Indians do. And so they have adopted and adapted all of these pieces of Indian culture and tradition. And it's so deeply rooted in them, which is so interesting, because when I visit Siddhi communities and I see some of the things they do, reminds me of my grandmother when she tries to do things, during a festival. And it's just amazing how Siddhis have also over the years adopted all of these practices into their lives.
Right. Well, it's like us, right? Everywhere we go, we take to that native place and make it ours.
That's right.
Just to be comfortable.
Yes.
And inside us, we still have our traditional stuff that we go ahead and do all the things. So.
And interesting, Siddhis, when you spend enough time in a Siddhi community, you recognize very quickly how there's pieces of their African traditions that come into their dancing, which is really beautiful. And sometimes you can recognize a few Swahili words in some of their traditional music. And so it's ingrained in them, and you see it. But the other interesting thing is that a lot of the older generations have amazing stories that almost seems like tales.
Right.
And so the younger generation are not sure whether to recognize them as tales or if this is a real story. And it's very beautiful to actually see and hear Siddhis dance, because at times you think, wow, you're in India and they are Indian Africans, but there's a piece of Africa with them right there.
So do they still talk their native language as an African language? I know there's many languages in South Africa, but in Africa. Why am I saying South Africa? Africa. So do they?
So Siddhis are predominantly, depending on the region of India that they speak only the Indian languages. So in Karnataka, Siddhis speak a language called Konkani.
Konkani.
And the state language is Kannada. And they also are very, they're able to actually adapt and learn very quickly multiple Indian languages because of the migration pattern of Siddhis. They speak multiple Indian languages.
Okay.
A lot of Siddhis are now learning English, so it's been good for me in that way, because I don't speak many or any English Indian languages, and so it's been great to be able to have some conversations in English. But I try my best to learn some words to be able to communicate in the native languages of the Siddhis. Yeah.
I always think if they can take the time to learn our language, why can't we take the time to learn theirs, right?
Yes, I wish I could be there for a lot longer. I think it would be a lot easier for sure.
Oh yeah. So I can understand that love for being there all the time.
Yes.
It's like amazing.
Yeah.
It's like I'm feeling all this.
I do enjoy being there. I feel this year I'm a little sad that, based on the launch of my website and doing a lot of exciting work, I feel very sad that I cannot spend time in India this year.
So because of the exchange program you went over, you got this sense of the needs of what the needs of that community was. So I know you talk of different things, but how is your menstrual hygiene education empowering and engaging women in India, in that part of the world?
Yeah. So when I went to India initially, like I said, I was really trying to understand the cultural intersection between Indian Africans and African Indians. And I stayed in a hostel run by Holy Cross Sisters in a tiny village in Karnataka. It's in a forest area, so it's very, very remote. And when I stayed at the hostel, one of the things I recognized very quickly, it was a mixed group of students. So the lot of Siddhi girls, this was only girls, and there were other untouchables, when India considered OBCs, other backward caste girls, that also lived in this hostel. And so at days at a time, there would be like 2 or 3 girls that would remain, adolescent girls that would remain in their hostel, and I would ask the nun in charge if she could tell me a little bit about why the girls were remaining in the hostel. And she would say, oh, they're not feeling well today. And so I would go talk to the girls, and because I came from the outside, the students were very friendly, but during these few days that they were not well, you notice that they would not want to talk to you, and then I would go and try to push and get an answer. Was I just curious as to why they weren't feeling well? I just wanted to make them feel better because they were so bubbly at one point. And so then the students would just say, oh, Didi, which is sister, my stomach's hurting. And so I would wonder, is it the food that they're eating? Because sometimes we don't have power. But then I realized their food would be cooked daily. So yes, it's cooked right at breakfast, it's cooked right at their snack time, and then it's cooked at dinner time. And so nothing is left over. And so it wasn't the food. And so I asked the sister again if she could tell me what was going on with the girls, because now it became 3 days and 4 days, and now the girls are losing out on school and they're not going, and the stomach cramps, something else must be going on. And finally, after 3 weeks, I learned that based on the lack of sanitary products, the embarrassment at schools, and the stigmas attached to menstruation based on the religious and cultural pieces from where the students came from, that they would not attend school. And so that actually brought me to recognizing that my initial reason for going there was important, but learning about about menstruation and how it impacted the young women really had me set back and had me rethink about many things. It brought me to a time where I remember being in South Africa and just being told about menstruation as if it was something that was gonna happen, and it's not the greatest thing, but it's gonna happen. And when it does happen, you have to be extra careful. And one of the biggest things I remember is that I had to be careful of boys, and I wasn't quite sure at that time why I had to be very careful of boys, because I remember one story being that I was going to have pimples if I looked at a boy whenever I had my period. And so, just being in India and start thinking about all of these things, I returned to the US with a very heavy heart, but with also a lot of learning and excitement about being in India with a community that is African in India, and then thinking of the South Africa and me being Indian was just very exciting. However, I recognized that arriving here with a heavy heart, that something had to be done for these young women who I became very close to, and just you're living in the same spaces where learning together, eating together, staying in the same spaces. It just really was a time where we became very close. We'd do after school programs. And so it was really something that sat with me, and I would cry. I remember waking up at night crying, telling my husband, something has to get done. And a friend of mine at college said to me, my friend Lily said, we have a Davis Projects for Peace, and you should apply for this project that you so want to do. And I did apply for that project, and at that time I was also a fellow, and I used that experience in India and took advantage of these fellowships and wrote a project that was going to make reusable sanitary pads. And the most important thing, it has to have an engaging component to it. had to be educational, and it had to empower the individuals that were recipients. And for me, that was really crucial and really important.
Right.
And so that's how the project came into being.
Oh, that's such a sweet story.
It was a mouthful.
No, but I mean, it makes so much of sense. You know, and you know, coming from the Indian background, we know the stigma attached to this too, obviously.
Yes.
And I do know, you know, women are not supposed to walk around, not supposed to do, they're supposed to just be in a corner. And I'm thinking that's what you've been describing when you were, you know, talking about all these things. So, and it makes a lot of sense, and it's so nice that there are people like you that go and make, at least make it feel a little better for these young women.
The project is really to have the young women, especially the Siddhi community, who are very open to learning and want to know what it is that they need to know, that was not brought to them either because of their location, the geographic location. Not many nonprofits, there may not be a lot of government help in those regions, and so it's been really great to be able to connect with the community and know what it is that they would like to learn. And so it's easier to bring things that are going to enhance and empower the community, and it's something that they really want, and it's not something that I am just going and saying you have to learn this, but it's rather a really it's a two-way process. You know, I go in with something, and if it's working, we work together on making it culturally appropriate, and so that the community is able to feel comfortable and therefore empowered,
Right.
and they're able to engage other people when I'm not actually in the field. And so that's been really important for all the work that I do.
Oh, that's very important for sure. So, does your menstrual hygiene work have an economics or development impact?
Yes. So we have been working since the start of our project. We try to be, we have a sustainability component to it and an economic component to it. We have women and young girls, especially a lot of times once school is finished, a lot of the young girls end up getting married based on cultural traditions, and so we train them on how to make the actual pads. And so they'll have the skill set of making pads, and then they move away from their village. And so if their villages are further away from their community, they actually take a skill set with them that they could actually make these pads and engage and empower and educate the women in their new villages. And so they get to sell them when they move on to their new villages. And they also are receiving sewing machines at times.
Oh, nice.
And so we also provide other kinds of resources to support them to get to that next stage. And so the economic piece also helps the Sangar groups, who are women who do microfinancing. And so those groups of women are incredibly resilient, where they save money and are able to either send their kids to school or complete building their houses, and they want to be able to have resources that are sustainable. And so the women who sew the pads were able to then bring it to the Sangar groups, and the Sangar groups will decide what is the right price for them to actually sell these pads for, so that they can use this money as a savings for them to then get to the next step of whatever it is that they want to use this resource for. And Small Acts of Sustainability supports the women that are actually sewing the pads.
Okay. So you use the word Sangha. I know you did, so you can find the meaning, but just for our viewing audience, can you just define Sangha?
Sangar groups are small microfinancing groups you find across India, especially in smaller villages, where women really come together and pool their money monthly in order for them to be able to develop or use this to help support their families. Like I said, either build houses, some of them have farms, so to improve their farms. Sometimes it's even used to support the marriages of their children.
Oh, wow. So I know this must go hand in hand, right? Mental issues. So can you tell me about your work on mental health and why it's important?
Sure. One of the things that I recognized very easily when I was in India, so some of my stories are very heart-wrenching because I work in such a rural space, and a lot of time the monsoon season can destroy a lot of the farmland, and so a lot of the young children end up losing their parents because they're not able to pay some of their bills due to the monsoon ruining all of their crops. And at times many children have lost their parents because the parents would commit suicide, and it's become very prevalent in these areas that I work in. And so one of the things I recognize is that we also have a lot of kids in this system who were very, very quiet or always alone, and around an exam time the rates of suicide becomes higher. And so we worked with some of the other nonprofits in the area and started to assess the students and recognize that this is such an important component. Understanding mental health, there's a stigma attached to it, just like menstruation. And we recognize in our focus groups when we talk about menstruation how often mental health issues would come in. Women would feel sad and depressed and alone and isolated. A lot of them talk about not wanting to be around anymore during these times, and the need for mental health awareness and understanding that there is support systems out there. There are people that can help you. There's counselors, and at times some people might need more than just a counselor. How do we actually support you and the needs? And so one of the things that we recognized is that we need to bring in a program. And so in 2016, with the support of Adolescent Wellness, which is out of Wellesley, we brought a program into Karnataka called Break Free from Depression, which was a Rotary grant. And we were able to use that grant to create programs, train counselors, staff, and to get programs initiated in order for students to get the support they needed, and also to do workshops to support peer-to-peer learning and to be able to create spaces where mental health issues were no longer a stigma, but rather a space where children would feel comfortable to speak about it and to recognize when there was that heavy, difficult times and times where they felt that things were not good at home and they felt the burden of it, that there was a space for them to actually have an outlet, some space to feel comfort. And so we have workshops where we created peer-to-peer time where kids would do yoga or art and crafts, whether they would do plays to raise awareness about mental health. We'd have workshops and trainings for counselors, wardens, and staff members to recognize when something isn't right with a kid, and so that we can actually give them one-on-one counseling. So
actually, I remember speaking to the guy in the Rotary. Well, we are part of the Rotary. ActonTV has got a membership with the Rotary too. And yes, I remember him talking to him about this.
Yes,
program.
Bob Anthony.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I know you must have some, what new initiatives are you excited about?
I'm really excited. I'm really excited that we have launched our website, because now we're able to share with the world some of the most incredible things that we are doing or we have been doing. But the new things that we are working on is creating a mentor-mentee program. We'd really love, and this is something I recognize for myself, is having a mentor has been an incredible resource for me and has guided me in the many things that I have been able to do. And I'm very grateful to my mentor for that. And we also recognize that when we're on the ground, and including being here in the US, is that having someone who you can ask very specific questions when you're unsure, that you feel comfort, someone who's in the field, especially if you're a first generation college going student, sometimes having that mentor can really help guide you in ways that you won't even recognize your own strengths. And so having a mentor is really, really a crucial part of one's growth, I think, at least in my case, and I've seen that in other friends and families, and I see that in the work that I do. Now I see some of the kids that I work with are, interested in either, opening up business or going to higher education, encouraging themselves to learn, a language that they're unfamiliar with. So for me, that kind of thing is really important. So I think I'm really excited about being able to start the mentor mentee program. I hope that will be, if right now we're just working on over 18 years, so anyone 18 years and older.
Okay.
And we would like to be, once we can figure out something with COVID-19 where it's safer, we would love to have younger children, so a lot of adolescents. But for right now, we're focusing on 18 years and older.
Perfect. So what would be your last message to our audience? How can they reach you?
Oh, my last message would be is to please check out our website at www.smallactsforsustainability.org, and to let us know what you think about our projects. We have a blog post. We encourage you to write to us on topics related to women's health care, education, and mental health. We are looking forward to new bloggers, so we hope that you would write so we can empower and educate and engage other communities. A big thank you to the Siddhi community, and we're moving our mental health project to South Africa, so keep an eye for that. If you're interested in getting involved, please feel free to contact me.
Contact email maybe?
Yeah, it's smallacts4@protonmail.com.
Well, thank you, Fiona, for such an enlightening program, and so encouraging to hear the work you're doing, and may it grow years and years, and everybody becomes mainstream.
Thank you.
Thanks a million.
No, thank you. I appreciate this.
Yes, and thank you all for watching. Always available on ActonTV.org or YouTube. Any questions or answers or anything you'd like to know, you can always write to flavorfuleats@gmail.com, or we have Fiona's details too. I'm your host, Hamsha Naidu. Till we meet again, take care.